And unmute. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Adam Cook, and you are with PowerShell Southampton today. And we have Josh Duffney with us.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. So thanks everyone for attending. Some things I want to run through real quick before I hand over to Josh when he does his session. It's going to be about an hour, give or take. If it overruns, obviously that's okay for us. You can come back and catch the recordings tomorrow on our YouTube channel. If you need to drop off, that's obviously okay. There is a chat functionality if you're not familiar. Some of you are using it already. On to the right of the screen, you can engage with us. Please do. If you have any questions, ask them. Because you have no opportunity to use a microphone or unmute and use your microphone, just use the chat. I'm going to be watching it, and Josh is happy for me to interrupt him with your questions, and that's probably the most effective way, probably. And I think Josh is happy with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime there's questions, just feel free to pop them up.
Cool. There's also a quality setting, and it's worth pointing out because when Josh gets around to sharing his screen, sharing code, you'll want to watch us at the highest possible resolution. So if you hover your cursor over, at the bottom right, there's a settings cog. Choose quality and go to 1080p. Highly recommend it. And one last thing before I hand over Josh, I just want to say a quick thank you to the PowerShell community. I wouldn't be able to stream the way I am now, delivering this content for you guys without the PowerShell community. So thank you so much, everyone in the community. And that's pretty much it. So what's it you're going to be doing then? I know it's obvious because it's in the title, using Ansible with Azure, but
yeah, so what I'll be doing is I'll be live. So this is going to be live. I haven't, this isn't all pre-cooked. Some of it is. I'm going to pull from, full disclaimer, I wrote a book on Ansible, so that's available and out there. So I'll be pulling from an open source repository that has code samples in the book, but it is live, and I do expect that I'll have some problems, but hopefully we'll work through them. And yeah, just as I go through, don't hesitate to stop me and ask if you want further explanation, or even if it's an explanation of benefit for what it is I'm doing. But we'll start by really just talking about what Ansible is, and then I'll try to correlate it because my background's PowerShell and everybody here is PowerShell user group. So I'm going to talk in PowerShell terms, and I'm going to translate Ansible to PowerShell. So that's pretty much the talk, yeah.
Excellent, fantastic. Looking forward to it. Okay, I'll switch scene now to you and your screen share, so hopefully people can see that now.
All right, so I guess we'll start with the slide deck that I closed while I was debugging stuff.
Oh yeah, you had an issue that caused you a heart attack before you joined, but you managed to.
Yeah, I managed to get past that. So I might have many more as we go through. So yeah, the talk is using Ansible with Azure. So it's going to be using Ansible against Azure. But again, like I said, I'll be talking about Ansible through the lens of PowerShell, because that's my background and actually how I learned it. And we're going to do it live, like I said. So really, this is a slide. My name's Josh Duffney. I'm an SRE at Stack Overflow. And yeah, let's dive in. So there's the slide. To start, I guess we'll talk about, is it cloud? Is it shell? What's a cloud shell URL? Is it shell cloud?
It's a great question.
I can do this here. We'll load it up. So Ansible actually exists. I don't know if this will, inside of Cloud Shell. So we'll let it connect here in a second. Might even need to go to bash, but what it is, though, while this is loading, Ansible is a configuration management tool, and it's open source, so it's free to use, and it's all command line driven. So, but it does have like a web UI that you can put in front of it. That's a paid product, but it is inside of Cloud Shell. Maybe. So it is, yeah, version 2.9.11. That might be a little bit small, but all I really want to do here is show that you can create resource group. So if we go and we just Google Azure, was it Ansible Azure resource group, we'll see that there's some documentation on how to create this. It's got lots of different parameters, but essentially it's just this function right here. So it's all YAML based. So the name of this would be, this is the name of the task in the playbook. All the examples are in a playbook, and that's kind of confusing in the beginning because you don't start with PowerShell in a playbook. You start with PowerShell at the command line. And there is a command line utility for Ansible. It's just less talked about. It's just called Ansible or ad hoc Ansible commands. So what I'll do is just show you how to use these modules with Ansible from the commandlet first. So this is the name of the module. It's called Azure RM Resource Group. And what it does is it creates a resource group. And if we come to the prompt, I'm just going to do ansible-m and then the name of that. And then I need to figure out what the parameters are. And I only care about the mandatory. And I think the only mandatory two are name and location, but you can confirm that up by this table here. So if we scroll up a little bit, we can see what the defaults are and if they're required or not. So I think we just name is required, as we can see here. So let's take name, paste that in, and we'll say Ansible PowerShell user group. And we'll remove the hyphen because I don't know if they like that. And are there any other required? Doesn't look like there's any other required. So location must just pick one by default, whatever one your context is in. Oh, is it Ansible?
Is there a means to zoom in slightly a little bit?
Let me see.
On the Cloud Shell.
Font size, large. A little better?
It's a little better, yeah.
Okay. I won't be in here for long, so don't worry.
Okay.
Dash. Oh, is it dash A? Well, here, let's look at some examples. Yep, dash A. So I need the argument. So here we go, Ansible-M, Azure Resource Manager or Resource Group, and then the arguments that I need to pass. So that's with the dash A switch, and then it's name equals. Okay, so name equals, and then we'll give it the name of the resource group, which is Ansible PowerShell psug. We'll see if that works. No. What am I doing wrong there? Let's see here. Dash A. Localhost. Yeah, maybe we need a target. So there we go. Okay. So again, I mean, this is kind of the confusing parts with PowerShell, right? Is you need required. Let's just look at this again. So this is what ran, and I got an error. So there's Ansible, and then I need this like target, which is localhost, which is specifying itself. Now PowerShell, you just run locally. You don't need that. Then I need a module name. This would be like equivalent to a commandlet. And then there's the arguments. And so like that's why by default, a lot of the examples are showing playbooks, because that's the power of it, is like creating this like top bottom procedural automation. Ad hoc command is used infrequently. There's use cases for it, like when you want to restart a fleet of servers and you don't have a playbook for that. But to continue on, we now know that we need another argument. So to do that, we would just do, I think, another dash A and location. And then we can do like, is it East US? Double quote. Oh, I got to combine them. So they're all in one. And there we go. Now we've got user group. Or not user group. We've got a resource group created here, and it turned yellow or this orange color because it changed. Now, if I run it again, it'll be green. And that's a difference between, like a scripting language and Ansible, is all these modules are idempotent. So you run them once, it changes something, you run it again, it does nothing because it has a test feature. It's very much like DSC resources where you invoke them and they have the get, set, and test, which gives you that idempotency. that was kind of painful. That's not like a really good entry point into Ansible, right? Like I kind of had to fumble around the command. Like I just wanted to create a resource group, and it's, I don't know, like 30 characters. But that's not actually the power. The power of it is if we come into here in chapter 3 and we pull up, where's the resource group? Oh, that's AWS. That's why they don't have resource groups. Resource group there. This is a much easier way to see it. And we know that the resource group in Azure is just the foundation of whatever your infrastructure is. So there's going to be many, many more things that come into play here. So taking that ad hoc command and transferring it into a playbook, this is what's called a playbook, and they're written in YAML. They start with the 3 dots to indicate that it's a YAML file. And then there's this host list. So remember when I forgot the host name? This is how you specify the targets. So you think about that as like the dash computer of invoke commands. So Ansible, all things run remotely. It's not meant to really run against itself. So that's why you have to be explicit when even you want to run locally. This connection local just means that it's going to bypass the remote protocol. So by default, Ansible uses SSH to try to connect everything. It's an agentless configuration management tool, which means that you don't need to go around and install agents or put them into your image. It uses WinRM, PowerShell remoting for Windows, and then it uses SSH for Linux operating systems, and it has some other ties into networking equipment as well. So that's basically like how you connect, is this first block, this host list. And then the next is the tasks. So the tasks are what it does. And as I mentioned before, Ansible is a procedural configuration management tool. So there's not really a way to put, like, other than conditionals, to put a preference on your order. It's very much like this is the exact order that we need to do things in, and that works for a lot of automation and for configuring mutable infrastructure. And so this is basically going to be a top-down list of all your tasks. So then in here, this is just the name. So when the playbook runs, you're going to see this pop up and give the task a name. Then we see the module that we're using again. And I have a neat little helper that points me to the documentation every time I do that. So that's a VS Code extension, just called Ansible if you want it. But then we have all the names. So here I know from the command line experience, I fumbled around. I needed the name and location. And location didn't tell me it was required in the docs, but apparently it is for Azure. So, I mean, that's typical, right? That's typical of documentation. The API is always different. So that's that command translated into a playbook. A little bit more useful. And so I'm inside an Ansible container, and we'll get to how I got here in a second. But I want to just demonstrate how we would run this versus the command line. So if we do Ansible playbook, Azure create resource group .yaml, and I'm just going to run it.
See, that's interesting, right? Because you've used almost a different binary to invoke the YAML file as opposed to just Ansible, what you were using.
Right, yeah, totally different command, different binary. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, one of them is used to run on, you basically run one task at a time with the ad hoc command. You can chain them together, obviously, or you can script them together in calls, but it would basically be like calling the PowerShell exe every time you ran a commandlet. But now we can see that, I didn't need to specify the target. I didn't need to specify my connections. I didn't need to specify my modules or my parameters. It's all in the file. And then this is what happens when it runs. It ran against the local host, which is the play, which we'll talk about just in a second. And then it did this gathering facts. So by default, Ansible will gather facts about the system it's running on and populate variables for you, like the operating system. So you could do conditionals where you don't have to get that information. If you're writing PowerShell, you'd have to first write some code that queries the OS and then do some logic based on that. And then here's our task where we have our create resource group. And then the script ends and it has a recap. And because that resource group already existed, it returned back okay. If it didn't, it would have been changed. If it failed, it would have been here or skipped. There's all different status codes. And so that's kind of the difference between ad hoc and a playbook. So it said play, right? And what is a play? Well, this entire block is a play. Playbooks can consist of multiple plays, and they're all differentiated by this host block. So if we just repeated this single playbook would actually have 2 plays. And if you haven't worked with YAML yet, enjoy the white spacing and indentation. So that's basically, a brief introduction to playbooks and ad hoc tasks. So it's in the Cloud Shell, and that was fine and dandy. I didn't have to install anything. Another thing is I didn't have to authenticate to Azure because I was already in the Cloud Shell and I was already in a session. So that's kind of cool. And here I'm actually inside a container that is using a service principal that I was bemoaning about before the call started. And so one way that you can do Ansible is you can put it in a container. It's a term that I like to use is an ops box. So instead of using containers to run web applications, you actually can use containers to run your entire development environment. And what that looks like, if you're not familiar, is basically everything you need for your development environment is defined in a Docker file. And Ansible does need to be installed on a Linux-based operating system. So I chose to use CentOS 7. So that's the base. So you have from, and that grabs the base of whatever operating system you want. There's Windows containers out there, but the world of containers is very much Linux, and I would encourage that. Even if you're a Windows sysadmin, don't be afraid to learn some new things. And then next is the run. So this is basically like your bootstrap, right? Like these are all the things that I need. Right here are the things that I need for Ansible. I'm going to check for updates. I'm going to install Python 3 because Ansible uses Python. I'm going to use OpenSSH client because I'm going to connect to some things with SSH. And then SSH pass because I'm using password instead of certs later on. So this actually is what I need for Ansible to get started, and then down here. But the rest of this is just my ops box. Like I like to use PowerShell, so of course I have PowerShell in there, PowerShell 7, and then I trust the PowerShell gallery, and I install the AZ module, and then I update pip, and then here's where I'm actually installing Ansible. So you would need line 4 and line 13 really if you wanted to install just Ansible on anything that's Linux based. So you could put that on a VM or what have you. The container is really nice and easy. It gives you a way to share an environment across your team. It gives you a way to version your environment. And you can run that same container in a CI/CD system that runs your Ansible. So that way you have like this same ecosystem ported everywhere. And then right here, because I'm using Windows machines, I need to have this Python module. So you'll see that like all this together starts to build out my environment. And it's clearly defined and documented in this Docker file, which is nice. And so what I did to get this up is I built this file. I ran a Docker build command, which might still be in my shell history. So I basically just went to the directory that I was in. Is this text font size okay? Good? Okay.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Good. I always like to confirm. So anyway, here's where the Docker file was, and I basically just did Docker build -t to give it a T is for a tag and basically gives it a name. And since I'm just doing it locally and not pushing the container anywhere, I just called it Ansible. So that's everything up to date. Now, how I ran it is I'm running it interactively. And to run it interactively, I'm using the docker run command with -it. Some other options that are on this command that are very useful are rm and volume. So rm removes the container on exit. If you don't do that, just kind of this long list of stale stop containers that eat up your disk space. Volume mount is how the container becomes useful. So the volume mount itself shares a directory, in this case, my current working directory, inside the container as Ansible. So now what that does is I can use VS Code to edit my YAML and get all the fancy syntax, highlighting and whatnot. But when I run everything, it's inside the container. So that's how I can share that with the volume. And then I just specify a working directory, so when it starts, it puts me where I want to be. And then all of these are how I'm connecting to Azure. So there's several ways that Ansible can connect to Azure. The way that I'm using it right now is to use a service principal. So I provisioned service principal, and these are all the the information. So you could hide these environment variables or inject them with CI/CD. But you basically need these four. You need your subscription, your client ID of the service principal, your secret, and your tenant. And then once you have those, Ansible will just key off these environment variables and attempt to use them whenever it detects that you're trying to hit the Azure APIs or the Azure Resource Manager. And then lastly, just the name of the container. Running that puts me, I guess we can just rerun it here. If someone knows how to stop VS Code from printing that, I'm very curious because I have not been able to figure it out, and it drives me insane. But so now we're in a container. I'm the root user, and I have all these same things because I was in folder 3, right? Chapter 3 folder. So I'm there. So if I exit and I do a pwd, I can see the full path. I run it again. Here I am. So if there's any weirdness with your environment, you just exit the container and you start back up. It's super efficient. Now, again, like I can run, instead of doing that, I guess we'll run a more interesting playbook. It's cat winping. Password. Okay, we'll try that. So Ansible playbook. I wrote a playbook that will ping the Windows endpoint. So -I. So now that we're not running against localhost, like how do we run it against other systems that, remotely? And so if we go back to the portal, because I forgot the IP address, and I probably should just use PowerShell, but I'm just going to grab the IP of a Windows machine that I had. So I use Ansible to build this environment. We'll walk through that code in just a moment. But let's see here. Let's paste this in. And I think I just need the name of the playbook. Winping. So this password, it prompts me for the password. So I'll put in the password to the user so it's basically the local admin of the machine that it's running against. Rejected by server. Maybe I put in the password wrong. All right, so I did. So there's how I was able to ping with Ansible a Windows box. And this looks pretty simple, right? You just put in the IP, and then the name of the playbook.
Ping YAML again. I'm curious to see the insides of that.
Yeah, for sure. Just real quick, the I is for inventory. So this is a concept that differs from PowerShell, where Ansible is used to having a directory structure or some kind of external source that has all of your inventory, your infrastructure inventory, right? So it might be just your VMware, and you have to query that with PowerShell, and that's how you're doing it today, right? Or you have like this list of servers in a CSV. Ansible depends on that source. Instead of you just wildcard matching your targets, it needs to know what they are and how to connect to them. And so, yeah, just to your point, if we look at this winping playbook in chapter 3, I'm getting away with a very complicated command line by simplifying it, putting on the playbook. So at the very beginning, we see that we're defining the hosts. Instead of localhost, it's all. So there's this default group in Ansible that will target everything. And because we don't have any groups yet, because we don't have an inventory, we need to use that group. Otherwise, it's not going to find. It needs to match some kind of group membership. It's like an AD user with no domain affiliation at all. And then I'm turning off the facts to make it run faster. And then here's the var prompts. Again, these are all just built-in components. You can kind of think of these as commandlets, right? And it's basically just gives me a name, and then this is what prompts the user. and then I get the password. Now here is the fun part. All these variables are stored inside here. So just like a PowerShell script where you define variables inside, or maybe you'd have like default values for parameters, that's what this would be. So I'm saying like the Ansible user to connect to is Ansible. So that's just hard-coded the username in that example. Ansible password was fed in by the prompt. So this right here populates the password because of the name. So here's the name of the variable, right? Password correlates to this. And this is the syntax to call a variable in a playbook. And then I needed, because by default, Ansible connects over SSH, I need to specify WinRM. Because I don't have an Active Directory domain, I need to use NTLM. And because I'm using self-signed certificates with NTLM, I need to ignore certificates. And so like this is why it gets kind of complicated, right? This is the initial pain that you'll feel setting it up because it doesn't have an agent. A lot of this is there's a little less friction with other things like Chef and Puppet because they have that agent. There's not this dependency, but Ansible depends on your environment being remotely connectable. So you have to have PowerShell remoting set up in some fashion, and SSH if you're going to use passwords or keys. It depends on that, and so that's just part of the package really, is you have to build those, or you have to configure your environment in a way. So a lot of this can be just taken care of with your imaging solutions, whether you're using Packer or VMware templates. You can set this up inside there so your new infrastructure is already ready to go from the get-go with Ansible. And you can connect. Now, again, with PowerShell remoting, if I had a domain and I had Kerberos, there would be no problem. I would say Kerberos transport, and I'd be off to the races. And then down here is the task. It's very simple. It's just using this WinPing. And so that's kind of like a pretty high-level overview of Ansible environment, the difference between ad hoc commands and playbooks, why there's such an emphasis on playbooks. And so like this seems great, but these are pretty, easy tasks. Let's look at something a little bit more challenging. So if we pull up, we'll create the Windows machine. I have a series of playbooks chained together that created, we'll look at it real quick, in my resource groups.
While you're looking for that, we do have a question, if you don't mind if I ask you that. Constantine asks, does Ansible work with inventories with Azure private IPs? Does that make sense to you?
Azure private, yes, if the service principal can get that information. So it will work with private IPs if where Ansible is running from can reach it. Otherwise, it can't, right? Like I'm running it locally from my machine, so I need public access. But if your container or Linux host that's running Ansible is inside the same network space as those private IPs,
sure,
it absolutely will. So it just all network topology.
Okay, so there's one more question.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, no problem at all.
I don't mean to disrupt the flow.
There's no flow, so don't worry.
Awesome. Okay, so this is from John. So all VMs you want to manage with Ansible require a common username and password?
You can change. So that's where the concept of an inventory comes from. So you can scope your username and password to groups. So typically, hopefully, groups of if everything doesn't have a universal password, hopefully groups of your servers will. Or even better yet, you can actually detach your authentication mechanism and secrets to a different source. You could pull from CyberArk or Key Vault, right? And then basically matching from a host name or whatever fancy pattern you can think of, you could dynamically pull credential information from a third-party provider or a different external source. So, yep, a lot of flexibility.
That's it. I won't interrupt you.
No, they're not interruptions. They're really good questions. So there's a series of playbooks that I'll show you now that built this. And so it created a resource group. It created all this stuff, basically all the things you would need for two machines, a Linux web and a Windows web server. And we'll walk through just the Windows code for the sake of time, just so you can see it. Now, will admit that Terraform is better than Ansible when you want to provision, deploy, build infrastructure, especially in the cloud, because it's declarative. If I rerun this again and I want 2 servers, I have to basically like copy paste huge chunks of code in Ansible to do that. Where Terraform, you just put a count and you increment it, and it keeps track of the state. But where Ansible picks up is when you have mutable infrastructure and you have to continually provide that configuration. If you're not using something like server templating, where you're using you basically just spin up an image and that's your server. If you've got a more complicated environment, especially with Active Directory, or a bunch of agents that you need connected and stuff, where it just doesn't make sense to rebuild your infrastructure from images, that's the exact scenario that Ansible fits in perfectly. So back to the code. This is a playbook called Azure Create Windows VM. Now, name doesn't matter. I named that. It's just to be descriptive of what it's doing. Again, it's running against localhost because I'm running against Azure, and the local container that I have has the credentials to Ansible. The tasks here are to pause and prompt for a password. And then there's a conditional. So when password is undefined, it's going to pause and prompt. Now, I put that in there so I could override and provide a password manually at the command line, so I didn't have to answer prompts constantly when I was developing. And then it registers. It registers the password input as a variable. And then it sets a fact, right? So it registers it as output. So that's another neat thing in Ansible is like all these modules produce output. And so then you have to like register them. It's basically like, say you would run a commandlet and you would assign it to a variable. That's what register is. And then you have to set the fact though. So like doing this basically means you're calling it, but then you have to return it in assign, right? So this is essentially a return statement, and this is an assignment. So that way I have a password variable that I can use down the rest. Now, well, there's a typo. Run once just means it runs one time, and it's never been running once because I had an extra S. But this is a count. So it was interesting as I was writing the book and developing it. Of course, I didn't need to change my public names, but then as soon as like people started going through the labs, they would grab my 01 name, and so I had to put a random in there to generate, just grab like a random number of 1 in 100. I assume there wouldn't be 100 people walking through the book at any given time, so maybe I'll get super lucky and I'll have to add another 0 there. I don't know, but that basically sets a count that we'll use later on in the virtual machine name. Now notice like all of this is just built into Ansible. There's none of this I had to write myself. I just had to learn how to use the syntax. And the same is true for all the stuff that I'm about to show you. So when you create a resource, when you create VMs in Azure, you're not just creating one object. Like you need a public NIC, you need a resource group, you need a NSG to access it, and then you need the VM itself and the disks and all that good stuff. All of those are predefined modules that come in Ansible, or at least the Ansible Azure Python module that we pulled down when we built the container. And so here is the very first part, which is to create a virtual network. And if we look at the help for that, we could just pull up the documentation. I guess I need to update that. Or the plugin's broken. So if we Google it, we can find it. Ansible.
While that's loading, we have another question.
Yeah,
that's all right.
Feel free.
It's quite topical actually, because where you had that typo with the 2 S's. The question asks, can we validate the code we wrote before running it?
Yes. So there's a tool called Ansible-Lint that I should have ran on this tool. So yeah, there's a linter that is provided by Red Hat now because they bought Ansible, but that is absolutely something that even was it the last chapter? I think it's a chapter 10 of the book Become Ansible that I wrote. It walks through how to use that in the CI/CD. So that way, when you check it in, it'll lint that and return back syntax errors. And they have a whole suite of error codes and stuff. But let's just show the module index here. So where am I finding all these modules? Like, it's great that I have them listed out, but you probably don't know where to go to find all these, and it's pretty easy. So Ansible module index is what you want to search for. And in here, they're categorized. Like there's all the modules: cloud, clustering, crypto, since I can't see the full word, monitoring. So there's just a lot of different utilities in here. But we're focused on Azure, so we'll go into cloud modules, and we can see there's AliCloud, Amazon, and of course, if we scroll down past all the million AWS things, there's Azure. So this is where I was going when I was trying to build out these playbooks. Like, okay, well, I know, I wish there was a GitHub for this in particular, but there isn't. So if I wanted to do a VM, I could start to look for that. I think that took me too far. Yeah, Cloud Stack, Azure. And if we just scroll through here, there's a bunch of stuff for dev test. There's a key vault. So basically, you just look through here. We were doing the network one, virtual network. So I probably just come here and find the virtual network. Here we go. Manage Azure virtual networks. I can even get facts. I can set up peering. I can get facts about peering. So if a peer already existed and I needed to pull from that for a different set of resources, I could. So here's that particular module. And usually what I do is I skip down to examples. All right. And I grab one of these and I put in the minimum amount of information. And then I go up to the parameters and I see what I need to do to get the desired results. So here I knew I needed to do a resource group. I needed to do a name for the virtual network, and then give it a space, a prefix. Same thing with subnet. It's all parameterized, so everything needs this resource group. I could actually pull this into a variable and reuse that and only define it one place. So you can see like the parallels are starting to draw from PowerShell. Like everything can be static and in multiple places, but that those coding patterns that you've learned through writing PowerShell apply just as much to Ansible. If we go down, we know next we need to create a public IP. And since this is procedural, the order is critical. So I wouldn't create the virtual machine before the resource group existed, and I wouldn't create, the custom script extension for the virtual machine before the public IP was there, because it wouldn't work. And so we want to keep that in order. Here's the one where I'm using debug to output the IP address, and then network security group and all that fun stuff, where I'm allowing 80 and 443, but I'm also allowing PowerShell remoting. So that's how the client, I'm able to actually connect to it. It's because Ansible is provisioning the remote machine in a way that it can connect to it. And we'll just scroll down. I mean, it's kind of rinse repeat, right? So like you get the module, you find the parameters, and you start to build out your infrastructure using this playbook. Now, try to do this idempotently in PowerShell or idempotently in Python or Bash. Like that's so much code that you have to write that's now been condensed into the single file, where I can blow away that resource group and re-provision it at will. And so now I have like this one playbook that allows me to build out infrastructure. Now, if I wanted to make it into like kind of a script or parameterize it, I could abstract all this into variables and pass them in when I run them. And then I can use it as a template to build out environments versus just the way to build one environment.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I feel like you kind of answered already when you talked about Terraform earlier when you were comparing the two. But right now, this really reminds me of ARM templates, and this is favorable because it's a lot prettier and easier to read. But ARM templates to me would be better because it sounds like there's no opportunity to do things like loops with Ansible.
You totally can. Yeah, you can do loops.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if I have any. Let me see. Do I have any?
Because as you say, you've got like a boatload of resources there.
Yeah. So here I can, in the AWS one that I have, here's how you would do a loop. Let me just refresh. So I'm looping through all the instance IDs, and for every instance ID, I'm associating it with an elastic IP. So you could basically put a loop. You can also structure playbooks in a way that it's called a block. So you could say this entire block that spins up, a resource group, virtual network, your public IPs and your VMs. You can put that in a block and loop through it in a count like you would an ARM template or CloudFormation. So you could do that. I mean, that's kind of the tricky thing with all these different tools for code is like they can all do the same thing. It's finding out which one's best for the thing, your situation that you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So there's that. This warrants a little bit of explaining. So this is creating an Azure VM extension to enable HTTPS listener. So I wanted to use HTTPS. That's not enabled by default. To get that to work on Windows, you basically need to configure self-signed certs and then configure the winner on listener. To do that, I'm using a PowerShell script. So to keep everything self-contained in Ansible, though, instead of having to build the VMs, then go run this Azure thing or go run this other thing, I'm actually using Ansible to provision other Azure automation that then configures it in such a way that then Ansible can use it again. That way, everything's still in YAML, it's still in Ansible. I just have to learn how to use WinRM extensions. And my favorite part is wrapping JSON in YAML. That's what this is right here. That was fun. And by fun, I mean painful. But anyway, this will grab, run against the virtual machine, create a custom script extension. If you're not familiar, it basically just bootstraps a PowerShell script to run when the resource comes online. And then it runs this configure PowerShell remoting. It's a pretty decent script that's provided by Ansible. And it just sets up your NTLM authentication by using self-signed certs and then switching some firewall rules or creating some firewall rules to allow for the HTTPS traffic. And then, of course, it's executing in PowerShell. And the other great part is that you can use wait fors. So I'm going to wait for this port to become available on this public IP before I stop the playbook. So I know it's fully provisioned. So if I were to chain this to a configure playbook, I would have confidence that they're not going to run over each other, right? It's not going to try to configure the machine before it's available, and so forth. But all of this was just, built into Ansible, where I just needed to learn how to use the modules and how to embed JSON and YAML. That was the most time-consuming part. But yeah, all of this is just there. I mean, I've been writing PowerShell for 7 or 8 years now. And so I know my way around PowerShell and how to configure Windows boxes in particular. And in the 2.5, almost 3 years that I've used Ansible, I think I've written one custom module. And it was because I wanted to do some reporting on some IIS app pools. Like everything else, whether it's a module, most of it's done by modules that are provided by Ansible. If they're not there, there's Ansible Galaxy rules that are written by their community. If that's not an option, there's DSC resources that you can use inside Ansible. And if that doesn't work, you can just default to running PowerShell from Ansible in a script block. So you can actually just have Ansible run PowerShell just like this is, but with a Win shell. It's called a Win shell module that runs PowerShell. So that's all that. Where should we go next? I think we'll talk about inventories a little bit. So in the meantime, any questions so far?
We just got one troll from Brett Miller. He's asking, why is this demo not in Vim?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's because I forgot to put my extension on. And I got some feedback that the transparent background was hard to see. But I appreciate the trolling.
Yeah.
I've been learning Vim in the background. That's the story there. Is I've been torturing myself to learn Vim. It's actually very useful text manipulation. But to move on, we'll start exploring an inventory. Before I do that, I'll explain kind of the problem. So the problem right now is we have this Windows machine, and we have to write a playbook specific to it, and we have to pass in this I parameter, if you remember here. So what happens when there's 5 of those and there's 10 of those. Do we want to put in all those IPs? That's the thing that you get with PowerShell. Granted, if you're clever, what you'll do is you'll query like a VMware and you'll have that create you a string array, and then you'll pass that string array to invoke command. But Ansible, not so easy. I embedded PowerShell in here for a while, and it would just do that. So it would query, it would concatenate me a string, and then I'd plop it in here. But then I figured out what inventories were for. It's like that's the problem inventories solve is instead of having to put all these IPs, you basically put a group name. So like maybe Windows or Linux, or this is the API cluster or whatever it might be. And what that looks like, if we set 7 host vars, looks like this. So this is what an inventory looks like. There's several different types. You can use JSON, you can use YAML, or you can use this INI. I suggest you start with INI because it's just simple. These aren't going to work though because these are old host names. So let's update those with. We'll use the public DNS of the Azure stuff. So grab that. So that's the Linux one. And we'll grab the Windows. We'll save those. Actually, we'll copy this into a new folder, a new file. And we'll save it in the directory that I have mounted to the container, so I don't have to make a new container. Go to Azure. Hosts. Okay, so you see how I created it on my laptop, but now it's in the container because of the volume mount. And there it is. So if we wanted to run that same playbook against, or maybe a command, we'll use a command. What's my history? That's only got those. Is this the one I used it on? Okay. This is where we use the ping. So remember this big long command where we ran it against the one server and then we pinged the Windows machine. We had to add all these parameters, including the password. We'll do the same thing, but now we'll just put in the host file. So the inventory is hosts, so it'll pull in here. And it's going to run against all, and then it's going to try and run the win ping. All right, so we're successful on the Windows. In any minute now, it should hopefully fail on the Linux one, unless the Linux CentOS version has a WinRM connector.
How do you manage your host files in production?
In production. Oh, there we go. So yeah, I can't connect because it needs SSH. In production, the best way is actually not to manage a host file at all. And so you want to use a dynamic inventory source. You have a few options. If you're in Azure, you can use Azure itself as your inventory source. And so you can come up with a tagging strategy that allows you to query and populate an inventory based on that. And I could show, I'll show that because it'll be an interesting example. I think that is chapter, 9. So here's what you would do. You would connect it and then you would specify. So you're going to use the Azure RM plugin. This comes with Ansible. So there's a dynamic inventory plugin for Azure called Azure RM. Your inventory it needs to be named Azure_RM.yaml. Whatever's the prefix doesn't matter, but that suffix does. That's how it determines which plugin to use for Ansible. And then you need to give it a list of resource groups. So this is obviously scoped to the Ansible group. The auth source is auto because it's going to use my containers authentication. You can use a separate one. So like say you had a management subnet or a management resource group with your inventory data, you could use this to specify a different service principal. This just changes it by default. The plugin like adds a unique character to it to keep it unique, but I turned it off so it actually see what the host names were because I'm using those as DNS. And then basically you have two options. You have conditional groups or keyed groups. And the difference is, we'll just look at this line here. We'll uncomment it so you can see. So this is the group. So when hosts would be the group. And then this is how it's going to find it. So image.offer is a variable that Azure stores for you. And so when it does that get facts from the host, it pulls that down. And so if like image equals image.offer is Windows server, put it in the Windows group, right? And that's the way you can get away from what I just did here, which is here are all my Windows people or my Windows servers. And I'm just going to line by line by line. That's fine if your infrastructure is super static, but if you're spinning stuff up and down, and scaling out, it's not going to work well. And that's where dynamic inventory. So every time Ansible runs, it's getting a new refreshed inventory from whatever your source is. Other on-prem solutions, a good one is Netbox, or other any kind of IPAM. Look and just see in Ansible like what dynamic inventory sources are. You can also script your own if you're clever enough with PowerShell or Python. You can make your own. I did that with VMware. It was kind of slow, but it worked. So the other one is keyed groups. So this was conditional. So if you have this value and it matches this condition, put in group. Keyed groups take it to a new level. So you can basically say there's another fact or variable that Azure returns as part of the inventory called OS profile system. And that's even more specific. It matches Windows or Linux. It doesn't say Windows Server. And so you can say for all the Windows, basically for everything that matches the same OS profile system, put it in the group. So what that does is it both dynamically creates groups and populates them. So whatever your infrastructure is, whether it's Linux, Windows, or whatever, if this tag differs, it's going to group them all by that tag. So it dynamically generates the group itself, the Linux, Windows groups, and the memberships. And so that's the way that you can do it with dynamic inventories.
Nice.
AWS has the same concepts. They use different terms, but they do the same thing.
I guess you make a good point. It can just, you said it could be INI, JSON, or YAML. I guess I'm pretty sure there's modules out there to fiddle with INI files. So I guess if you were trying to do on-prem management with it, I guess you could roll your own, right? I just had a nasty picture in my mind of having to always keep this text file updated, but no, of course not. You can roll.
Well, I mean, if your infrastructure is fairly static,
Right.
it's a great place to start. And a lot of infrastructure is pretty static. Like there's change management boards you got to get through to provide new servers. There's like 16 teams that you need to get involved to create them. So like some places it's just not a reality that things are being built every day. So this failed because it ran against both, right? Like it ran against Windows fine, and that's where the concept of groups comes in. So now that we have an inventory, we actually have groups. And if I just change this to Windows, it'll just target the one Windows machine. And so that's pretty useful. Even if you have static files and you've got 200 servers in here and they don't change very much, you can start to use these as ways to target your infrastructure. And then now, instead of, where's that ping playbook? One ping chapter 3. See how this targets all? So if I ran that against the host file that I just created, it would fail because it's targeting all again. And so instead of putting the group at the command line, I'm putting the group in the playbook. So if I change this to Windows and I call that, so we're gonna run against the host file again, but I'm not gonna specify the group in the command. So then I do is it when ping? I think that's all I need, and then it'll prompt me for the password. Excuse me. And it works. And I just shortened my syntax. I went from this horrendous thing to that, because all of that complexity is now stored back in the playbook. So that's the inventories. So kind of to recap the progression, you can start with ad hoc commands, play around in the Cloud Shell, just create some resource groups. It gets a little tricky. You evolve to a playbook, but then you have to manage your variables, right? And then you eventually can create an inventory, so that way you group all that. So what's the problem now that we'll take up the last kind of like 5 minutes to talk about? Or maybe a couple minutes and then open up for questions. So like this is kind of painful. If you wanted to create another playbook, you basically be copying and pasting these variables all the way around. So the solution for that is to use group vars. And I think group vars is chapter 7. We'll do here, maybe chapter 6. Yeah, 7. So let me just exit the container. That didn't work very well. I just want to change to, is it chapter 7? Okay. Change to this directory structure so I can show you the directory layout. So group vars is, again, like you're starting to build up this repository of Ansible. Ansible isn't like PowerShell in the sense of like you just have this module that moves around. All of what makes Ansible is inside one repository or multiple, depending on how you have it set up. And so now, we have this host file that we're now dependent on because it has our host data. We have these playbooks that are at the root of the directory that are used to do certain operations and automate things and build servers. And now we need to get to the point where these variables that are in this ping playbook need to be shared across multiple playbooks. And so what you can see here is this group vars folder has multiple files. So inside our hosts, you remember we had the Linux and then we had the Windows. If you create a folder, the group vars folder and a file in that with the same name, those are the variables that correlate to that group. So now every time a Windows machine is called, it's going to get these variables. So if I just cat group vars Windows, you can see that it's going to get the Ansible user. It's going to have this vaulted password. So, I was playing with plain text passwords everywhere. Ansible Vault is a way that you can secure your variables. This is just a string that Ansible Vault did. So when I run this, I now have to pass in a password to decrypt the vault and then run. So that way I'm not storing my passwords in clear text when I commit this to source control like I should. But now all Windows machines that are in that group are sharing this variable set, and I don't have to put that in my playbooks. So if we look at WinPing in chapter 7, sit here. Here, we'll just look at the, WinPing no vars. That's it. Minimize that. This now it's reduced. All those variables are inside the group vars, and my playbook gets even more simple, where I just basically say I'm going to target Windows, grab the variables from that file, and here's my task. Now the same thing would apply if you were to like take out, VM size. You could abstract that out to different groups. Like your web tier is going to be a certain size, and your API is going to be a certain size, and your database is going to be a different one. You can move all those into the groups now and free up and declutter your playbooks. So I think we got through about most of it. I guess we'll take the last couple minutes to just answer questions. I can dive into other things if there's opportunity for that, but pretty much it.
I have a question while we wait for some people, if any, to pop up questions in the chat, because there's none right now. You spawn up Ansible in a container, which enables you to use it in your dev environment. That allows you to carry it around. But I predominantly work on Windows. I'm quite alien to Docker, so could I spin up that on a Windows machine, create a Docker container that then gives me Ansible, because it sounds like Ansible binary isn't available for Windows?
Yes, you absolutely can. So if you use like Docker Desktop or anything like that, that allows you to spin up a Linux container, you can have the same. And that's one thing that I've really enjoyed. I use a Mac primarily, but a lot of, like any team that I've been on has been 50-50. It's either Mac or mostly Windows, but using the container gives the whole team the ability to use the same environment. Now, there are some syntax differences of like how you run Docker commands versus Windows and Linux, but that's minuscule to like having an entire environment be different when you're executing. So you absolutely can use this on Windows, the Docker container that I'm using here.
Excellent. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to enter them in the chat. We'll give it a couple of minutes. If not, we'll. This is probably the first session I've ever run, Josh, where it's finished on time. I think that was probably the most effective and concise amount of time spent.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's kind of the thing without having an agenda to get through. Just got through as much as I could, and hopefully it was informative.
You did mention there was something to do with IIS, and you didn't touch on that.
Oh, yes. Let me just run that.
Are you worried about time on that, or is that something?
No, that's okay. Yeah. So let's look.
Because you showed us one example spinning up like a Windows box, but you did say before the call that you had one spinning up a web server. And when you've done that, we do have a couple of questions, I think, that have just rolled in. So that's good.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'll run through this quickly. Let me just kick it off quick so we're not waiting on anything. Okay, so I'm in the Ansible directory, changed to chapter 7. I'm just moving to the directory where the playbooks are so I can mount them to the container easier. I guess I could mount the whole directory. That'd probably be the simplest, but is it 6? Yeah. Okay, so ints. All right, let's start the container again. So I'm in the container. I've got these new playbooks. I have one in here called Configure IIS Web Server. Take a look at it in a second. And I think I have hosts. Oh, my host file isn't there. So let me grab the IP quick. That's kind of the downside right there. What you saw is like my host file wasn't in the same directory as the playbook, so then I have to grab, the server name again. I think all the rest is prompts. Oh, it helps if you specify the playbook you want to run. So the username is Ansible, and then the password didn't show up in the prompt, but let's see if that kicks off. All right, so yeah, at the very beginning, we walked through like how to build a Windows machine, and that arguably and admittedly is better done by other tooling to provision new tools. But I mean, in the beginning, you use it for everything you can to become competent with it, right? But anyway, so here's the playbook to configure. Again, it's targeting the alls because this playbook doesn't depend on an inventory. And then it's prompting for the username and password. That's nothing new. Setting the variables for the Windows to connect. Again, this could all be abstracted into your group vars we talked about. And then here, we're task by task going to set up IIS box. So first, you need a Windows feature, and that Windows feature is web server. And I want to include all management tools and sub-features. Like that's several different commandlets that you would need, or at least parameters in PowerShell. And again, to go back to the item potency, and it's procedural, but it is declarative in a sense because I just declare the state to be present. I don't have to figure out how to make it that way, right? Make it so, as Jeffrey Snover says. And then I'm going to copy. I have a little index HTML file in there that I'm going to copy and make up my own little custom web server, and I'm going to force it in case because there's something there. So I want to override. I'm going to create a log directory. So you can see these are just modules that are built in, and they're all Windows prefixed. So on Windows, just look for win _ and you'll find all the modules you need. Again, all I need there is the path and the state. Here's a neat thing. You can combine it with Chocolatey. So I want to install .NET Core IS hosting only with no frameworks. And how I can do that is I can use Chocolatey. I don't have to automate this myself or write PowerShell to do this. I can just utilize the public repository. You can use internal sources as well. I specify the version and then the install arguments. And so now I'm just starting to build up. Then this is a neat feature that's difficult to do in PowerShell, which is this notify handler. So this, I only want this to run if there's a change. right? Or actually, so I only want this to restart IS if there's a change. The first time this installs, IS needs to be restarted before it can take effect. But I don't just want to restart IS every single time it runs, because I don't want to take production down. So you can set up a handler that says notify IS reset. And what that means is when this changes, it will kick off this handler. And this handler down here is restart IS, and it just basically runs WinShell. So again, like all these things that you can just port into Ansible. So like I couldn't find an IS reset module, but I know there's a super dead simple solution in PowerShell or command prompt, which is just run IS reset. And so instead of like overcomplicating it and going through and trying to figure out how to create my own module in Ansible, I'm just going to run PowerShell. And so I'm going to using WinShell, and I'm going to restart IS. But again, only if this is a new install. So that's the code. And this probably will take us past time because IS takes a while to install. But you can see that it gathered facts from that, and it's starting to execute and sequentially build up the configuration of that Windows box. So I could take questions if this finishes in due time. Then we can look at we'll hit the web server to see that my index is there. But
yeah,
that's essentially it.
Okay, excellent. Well, just to recap though, that notified, that will only run if it detected a change. So
right.
Change, like it knows what's changed, right?
So this module itself is where it's getting that. So if WinChocolatey, the logic in there detects a change, so right. I'm dependent on them making their module idempotent. Right. If there's just returns a status change all the time, then I'm gonna be in bad shape because it's just gonna rebound. It's gonna bounce IS every time. But after I tested it, this does turn back green when it's already there. Now, if this version changed, right, and it installed a new version, it would bounce IS.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Okay. Brett again. I don't think he's trolling this time. I think it's
that's disappointing.
I think it's more of a like a statement this time. So for me, a tough part about DSC was setting up node information, and it could get quite ghastly managing groups of nodes. Ansible looks better at being dynamic. Is there a recommended way to manage large inventories? That is actually a question, not a statement.
Is it a question?
Yeah, the question is there a recommended way to manage large inventories? Yeah.
Dynamic source, right? Like have some other thing be your input. And for DSC, it's all config data, but that's still manual. That's essentially an inventory file.
Yeah, I think that was what he was referring to when he said it was ghastly managing groups of them. But
right. Well, I mean, that's what Jeffrey Snover means when he states that DSC is a platform. And so you'll notice that all the other configuration management tools use DSC. It's just all that extra tooling that's in these existing config management tools that makes it easier to use. That's the road that I went down before I started using Ansible. I started to write all that through PowerShell myself. But then I realized there's 3 other companies that have done this before, and I probably wasted my time. Unless I want to start a startup that builds tooling around DSC, which I'm sure there's already companies doing that.
Excellent. Okay. And then there's Phil Carney. Phil Carney, not directly related to the demo, but still. Can you talk about Molecule compared to Ansible Lint? I'm not clear on the difference in purpose.
I have not used Molecule. I believe the aim with that is it's basically a way to test Ansible modules independently. So as you start to develop, you get ad hoc commands, you get playbooks. Those playbooks move into roles, and then those roles can be moved into what's called an Ansible Galaxy role, and that is completely separate. It has its own Git repository, and you pull them down like PowerShell modules. And so what Molecule allows you to do is to test that functionality. So it's really, think of it like pester tests for a PS Gallery module, where it's going to independently battle test that single module. Maybe it sets up Chocolatey, maybe it sets up a web server. A lot of them are scoped to a platform. So like there's a Redis rule. So it would really be testing that module to make sure that that self-contained logic of that Ansible Galaxy module is tested independently of where it's being used. So it's more or less a testing framework.
Right, sure. And he followed up with also, have things progressed since you rolled out your own VMware dynamic inventory script, or would I still have to write my own nowadays?
Yeah. So the thing with that was if you use tags in VMware, the calls are just really slow, and so we switched to using Netbox. So I would encourage using some other IPAM solution that gives you some more flexibility in tagging. Would be my recommendation.
Yeah.
Or just call VMware to dynamically generate your flat files. That would be the interim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And then Phil followed up once more, kind of on the back of his previous question, not the one about VMware, but it was just unit and integration testing rather than linting then essentially.
So yeah, that's a better succinct way to say it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. That's all of it. Did the ISS build finish?
Yeah. So here we go. So we went through, we got everything changed, chocolatey changed, or bounced IS. So if we go in, well, we got the name here. Well, let's see if it resolves. Ha! So yeah, if you're curious, that's the name of the book that I'm pulling all these examples from. So
I don't know if you spent significant time or a modest amount of time talking about the book where people can find a copy.
Oh yeah,
there might be an opportunity for doing that, I think.
Yeah, sure.
That's basically for probably everyone listening, I would imagine, the book, right?
Yeah, so everything that I've shown here is walked through in the book. All the examples I pulled through. So all the examples are on my GitHub under a repo called Become Ansible Show. But the book is called Become Ansible. You can find it. You get the first chapter for free at becomeansible.com. And then it's also available for purchase on Gumroad. It's officially released. The version 1.0 is out. I'll probably be making some changes over time. But yeah, it essentially it's a beginner's. Its aim is to take you from zero to production ready. It's not a book to teach you all the syntax of Ansible. It's a book to teach you how to use Ansible. So everything that I showed here, where I progressively walk through, like here's how you use it, and it's all models your PowerShell background framework because that's what I knew and came from. And so like it's described in that way. But you'll start with building out your environment with a Docker container, deploying cloud resources to Azure or AWS. And then as you progress through the book, you will build, configure, and deploy a Linux Nginx web server and a Windows IS server. And then the book ends with using dynamic inventories and then deploying Ansible using GitHub Actions. So you completely from source control all the way up, walk through building a code base in Ansible. And then the very end, when you commit to master, you will automatically be deploying and configuring your infrastructure.
Nice.
And it's all in 140 pages because I had I didn't want to write a tome. Yeah.
Wow, that's good going to get that much detail into 140 pages. That's good going.
Was it Jeremy Mura? I believe I say his last name. He said it. He gave me a message on Twitter. He's like, "This is really dense. It's a lot of information." But that's everybody's time is super precious, and I don't want to waste it with fluff. In my opinion, I wanted to give the reader exactly what they needed to know, and I used a different strategy in the book where I don't try to explain the errors. I let you run into them. I just explain how to get past them and why they happened instead of trying to explain all the situations where it wouldn't and would happen. I just kind of guide through the failure because that's how we learn as engineers is we hit the wall, then we learn much better than having it explained away verbosely to us. So yeah.
For anybody who's interested, I've put the link to the page Josh is showing now in the chat, becomeansible.com. So if that's everything then, and there's no more questions, and presumably there's nothing else to cover, Josh?
No.
I guess we could wrap up then. So yeah, look, Josh, listen, I really appreciate your time. That was a fantastic session, truly engaging, and I'm definitely keen to get rolling with this. You know, if there wasn't enough motivation before for me to learn it personally, there definitely is now. And to everyone listening, thank you all so much for joining. Like I've said before, the recordings will be made available for you guys from tomorrow morning. YouTube has to do some stuff I don't really know what, but it doesn't show showing. Something like
well,
that.
one thing that I'll mention is it took me a little while to get used to Ansible, and it actually took me longer to commit to learning it. And I realized it's kind of like a flaw that I have where when I learn something new, I think I need to master it or spend a super amount of time. And that's what I really wanted to highlight when I wrote this is you don't need to commit 100 hours or 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours to learning something. Like it'll be fun to learn. I can tell you that. And you might not use it in production, but it's worth learning because it gives you a fresh lens to look at infrastructure as code, and it gives you so many more paradigms to pull from, and PowerShell. And really, like my recommendation would be give it 20 hours. If you're interested at all in Ansible, just give it 20 hours, work through my book or pull examples from the internet and just dive in and then see if it sticks. And if it doesn't, then, you can let it go, but at least give it 20 hours and know that you don't have to commit thousands of hours to it just to pick up a few tricks.
I've heard you mention that before on Twitter, 20 hours, that concept a bit, and there is a book on it, and I can't remember the title of it, but it's interesting because when you put a number on it like that, it sounds so much more forgiving when you approach a new topic.
Palatable. Yeah.
Definitely, because you just think, okay, well, I don't know, 1, maybe 2 hours a day, a couple of weeks.
Yeah. A month of lunches, right?
Off. Yeah.
That's why that concept stuck so well, that month of lunches. An hour a day for a month, and you'll learn some PowerShell.
And you can totally consume definitely not like you said this before, but not like an expert level of knowledge, but definitely enough to not just be able to use, but maybe up to 20 hours or maybe halfway through, you'll get to a point where okay, I don't actually like or need or have a need for this. So it's definitely enough to get you motivated to get going and enough to help you decipher whether it's the path for you or not, which many other things you said, but that as well has stuck with me, and it's made me more approachable to new technologies for sure when it's come to learning new stuff. So yeah, thanks again. What else do I need to cover? I told everyone YouTube video is going to be available in the morning. Call for speakers. Yeah. Every time I say, if anybody has an interest in speaking, whether it's PowerShell, like today, Josh has done a bit of Azure Ansible with a bit of PowerShell. I mean, doors open. Please get in touch. I'd be very, very happy to have you guys on here to speak. If you haven't already, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join the meetup. And the next session, there is not actually a next session scheduled. And I'm just switching scene now to show the final slide where it does kind of show where there is no session scheduled. It's a bit of silliness. It's how to do Rum and PowerShell with Jack Sparrow, which is just, silliness. So yeah, please, anybody interested in speaking, get in touch. Very, very keen for speakers in creating more content for people to be engaged with. But Josh, again, once more, thank you so much for your time. And everyone else, thank you so much for tuning in.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.